Hello and welcome to this edition of Recitals. We'll be discussing social issues in depth. We made a slight change to the program. We are going to discuss everything in a slightly greater depth than we used to earlier, so that over a period of time you have much more better understanding of the issues involved. And what we have changed is we're going to discuss things according to themes. So this time the themes are going to be social security, social protections, women rights, women empowerment. And over a period of time, we'll be building onto these things and adding to more issues and more themes. Social issues, recitals. These are the topics we're discussing today. And let's get into it. First topic we're discussing is, can the government redistribute private property? Now, first let us start with the idea of what is private property, how is it understood in the world, and whether there can be an inheritance tax on it. The basic idea is private property is viewed in two extreme. There is basically a continuum. First, we have the anarchists with great thinkers like Proudhon and others, the French philosopher Proudhon. And the other extreme we have anarchist capitalists. So what the anarchists believed was, Proudhon asked a very interesting question. He says, what is property? And he answers it by giving a analogy. He says, consider slavery, and he says slavery is murder. Because what happens in slavery is you're taking away somebody's will, somebody's right to life, somebody's dignity. You're taking away everything from that person, so it's basically murder. And he says private property, by that analogy, is theft. So the anarchists said that private property is theft. Now the anarcho-capitalists on the other end, they believe, and this has become a quite popular idea in the alt-right views. Alt-right followers actually believe in this kind of anarcho-capitalism, where they believe that there should be no government and anybody can own anything. For instance, there will be corporations who own everything in the world, including, and to the extent that they believe even slavery can be legal. Now, between these two, we have a lot of other ideological positions which helps us understand the nature of private property. Once we understand what is private property, it brings up the next question: how do we reduce inequality that's caused by private property? Because the moment we have private property, we end up with social inequalities. And when we have social inequalities, we inevitably end up with societies that are extremely unstable. The more inequality you have in a society, the higher the possibility of instability and social upheavals. So that's the reason we continuously try to have some kind of welfare measures and redistribution as well. Now, coming back to inheritance tax, the idea we want to discuss today is largely inheritance tax. Now, coming back to this, the basic idea is there's this great philosopher called John Rawls. He popularized the idea of justice as fairness. Because of that idea, the idea of redistribution came up again, and that is where we have a lot of countries accepting the idea of inheritance tax. India doesn't have inheritance tax currently. Now, this is an important concept that I want you to pay attention to. Generally, there's a bit of conceptual confusion about estate tax and inheritance tax. Now, what is estate tax? Estate tax is paid by the estate. Generally, the will is executed by a executioner of the will, who's responsible for paying the taxes upon the death of whoever owned the estate. Now, after those have been paid, then the property is given to whoever the beneficiaries are. In the case of inheritance tax, it's paid by the beneficiary after they have received the inheritance. So there's a bit of a difference there. And the important thing is, estate tax is based on the total value of the estate. This is based on, inheritance tax is based only on the actual inheritance received by one individual. A person may have more than one heir to the property. So they would pay according to whatever they have received. Now, in many countries, what happens is there are federal taxes and state level taxes. For instance, Switzerland has taxes at the canton and they have taxes at the federal level. Similarly, United States has state taxes and federal taxes, and they then levy taxes according to so similarly, estate tax is split in different ways depending on where they live. And in India, we don't have either of these two. Now, we also have to understand how do we define private property in India, because private property is not just about a house you own or, a car you own or something like that. It's a lot more than that. So what we have is private and public property. Private is owned by an individual and public property is owned by all of us. Then there is movable and immovable property. There are basically 10 types of property in India. Tangible and intangible property, personal property and real property, corporeal property and incorporeal property. So now what happens is, we have several types of property. You may have intellectual property rights, that is not immovable, that is movable, and it is not even real. I mean, it's not corporeal. It's not like a house that you can actually see. You could have, rights to books, intellectual property rights. You could have stocks. You could have debentures. So depending on those types, taxes will be levied, or rather, that's how property is. Classified in India. You could have a pond with you. The fish in the pond would be dealt with differently. That's not, even though it is movable, it would be considered part of immovable property. So things like that. Suppose there are trees on a agricultural farm, they would be considered part of the land, and they would also be considered properties. And generally there are a lot of civil disputes regarding these things. So these 10 types of property, you must be aware of them. Current issue has come up because due to the elections, people started asking the idea that let us have inheritance tax in India, because we had it till a certain period of time, then they were removed. Because if you remember, when we became independent, we were about 560 or 556 kingdoms. Then there were zamindars who held on to land. There was a lot of disparity. So we have actually had property inheritance taxes in the past. We've also had redistribution in the past. Okay, now coming back, the current idea is about Article 39B of the Constitution, which falls under directive principles of state policy. Now remember, directive principles of state policy are non-enforceable. That is to say, even though they are there, by themselves, they cannot be imposed as a rule on anybody. However, they're supposed to guide us towards a set of ideas that we need to achieve as a nation. Okay. Now, this is, like I said, part 4 of the Constitution, and this covers social justice, economic justice, foreign welfare, legal and administrative matters. So that is 39B. Now, it places an obligation on the state to create policy towards securing ownership and control of the material resources of the community that are so distributed as to best promote the common good. So this is actually what is there in the Constitution, and this is supposed to guide us towards our goals as a nation. Now, why is the court trying to reinterpret it? Justice Chandrachud, the current Chief Justice of the country, he was talking about an interpretation by Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, who had a dissenting view in a case in Ranganath Reddy case of 1977. So even though this was a minority view, he had a dissenting view, and this has continued to actually influence us a lot in matters of property. Now, the question is old, and it has been revived due to the current political environment. We're just going through an election, so that's where it has become popular. Now, according to senior advocates and all, many of them actually have a lot of they have a lot of resistance to this idea. Everybody is thinking, what will happen to my property? The idea to be understood is, there will always be a certain limit, and inheritance tax would be imposed only over that limit. It could be 5 crores, it could be 1 crore, it could be 10 crores, and these limits would change over a period of time. And the idea of a limit above which taxes would be imposed is an important idea. We'll discuss that. Why it's important, we'll come to it in a minute. Now, Article 31C and provides safe harbor to laws enacted in the pursuance of directive principles of state policy. Okay. Now, continuing, some of the lawyers have taken extreme views, like if you take away my private property, then how am I to take care of anything? Whatever even I'm getting as a what do you call, a fee for representing a case would be taken away. It's not really, we are not talking about communism here. The idea is about redistributive justice to ensure that a society is less unequal and fair and more stable, more importantly. Now, what are the different case laws interpreting this? Like I said, there is a Ranganath Reddy case of 1977, where it was clarified that privately owned property does not come under material resources of Article 39B. So this is an old case. There was a 4-1 judgment, but this is a case in which Justice Iyer actually had a dissenting view, and his view, interestingly enough, has become the guiding principle and has actually influenced a lot of people. Now, there is a 1983 Sanjeev Coke case. Bench of five, they relied on the minority view of Justice Iyer and said that private property was included in material resources. So this is where things changed. Now we had the 1997 Mumbai-based Property Owners Association. They, again, that was also based on Article 39B. Then we had a 7-judge bench hearing property case. They also looked at 39B, and then there was a Mafatlal judgment that was also referred to a 9-bench judge. Now, how is the inheritance tax in other countries? Now, like I said, inheritance tax is imposed across the world, and it's not an unusual or strange idea. In Japan, it is 55%. In South Korea, it is 50%. France, it is 45%. United Kingdom, it is 40%. In Spain, it is 34%. Ireland has a 33% inheritance tax. And Belgium and Germany have 30% inheritance tax. So actually, a lot of developed countries practice the idea of inheritance tax. Now, in the US, it's a very interesting case. US did something like what we did, partly at least. US reduced the inheritance tax rates, and it provides a very great example, a very great opportunity to see what was the effect of this on inequality. So what happened was in 1980s, now 1980s was this great period of economic change in the United States because you had the Reagan era and everything. And a lot of laws were changed, a lot of regulations were weakened. In fact, the 2008 world financial meltdown can be traced back to this era, when a lot of banking laws were slowly withered away and ultimately led to the 2008 collapse. Now, similarly, around that time, they reduced their inheritance taxes. Now, only in 2023, federal tax was applied only to property valued about $13 million. Now, like I said, when we talk of inheritance tax, there's always a limit, and it's only over that limit that any inheritance would be levied, any inheritance tax would be levied. Now, in 12 states, estate taxes and only 6 states have inheritance taxes. Interestingly, like I said, the slashing of the inheritance tax in United States coincided with a sharp rise in the share of national income of the top 10% of the people. So very clearly, the moment they removed inheritance tax, inequality increased. Those who had more money continued to gain more money. So what happened was, in 1980s, the top 10% owned 33% of the nation's wealth. It went up to 47% by 2010. So that's almost like the top 10% of the country owns half the resources of the country. That's a massive state of inequality. Now, what happens in India? I mean, we have data. Let us see how is the inequality in India. Who owns what? In the case of India, there are a mere 760 people who have more than $100 million. It is actually not a very big sum. So you can see that just 760 people own most of the resources. $100 million in today's terms is not a lot, but only 760 people. These are 2017 figures, by credit to Global Wealth Report, and we'll continue with this. Now, $50 to $100 million, they're just 1,060 people. If you see less than $10,000, that's about 8.5 lakhs roughly. 770 million people, that is 92.3% of the people, own just 8.5 lakhs. That is all there is. So basically the rich people hold most of the wealth and the rest of the country actually holds nothing. Now, in the case of China, only 63.1% of the population has less than $10,000. In the case of India, it is 92.3%. So we can see that the inequality in India is much higher than what would be acceptable to anybody. Now, if you look at the distribution of wealth in a slightly different fashion, the top 1% has 45% of the wealth in the country. That's nearly half the wealth in the country is owned by just 1% of the people. The next 4% has 19%. Next 5% has 9.2%. So next, if you see, the bottom 40% has just 1.2% of the wealth. So basically, if we come down, most of the wealth is in the hands of the top 10%, like I said. So this is why inheritance tax might not be a bad idea. Now, how is the wealth inequality in the country over a period of time? You will see that between 1961 and 2021, the top 10% in the top 1%, there's a massive divergence in terms of how much wealth they hold. So, to put it in a slightly different fashion, the top 1% of the country has 77% of the national wealth, or rather top 10% of the Indian population holds 77% of the national wealth. In the case of United States, I said it was 47%, that was bad enough. In the case of India, 10% of the country holds 77% of the wealth. Many Indians are not able to even access medical care. If we take a rural worker in the country, it would take him 941 years to earn what a top paid executive at a leading firm in the country earns in one single year. So that's a kind of wage disparity that is there. One, we have wealth disparity. Two, we have wage disparity. Now, there are a few changes that have happened thanks to the massive success of liberalization and globalization, the liberal reforms that happened in 1991. The billionaire fortunes increased almost by 10 times over a decade, and the total wealth is higher than the entire union budget of the country. So, the billionaires in the country have more money than the budget that we have every year. That is a massive degree of inequality. Now, there are 119 billionaires in the country. Their number has increased from 9 in 2000 to 101 in 2017. And between 2018 and 22, India produced 70 millionaires every day. So a lot of wealth is being created, but it's going into the hands of a very, very, very small fraction of the population. Why it might be a good idea and why it might not be a good idea to impose inheritance tax. Now coming back, for a developing country like India, we need entrepreneurial spirit in the country, and if they're not convinced that their wealth is going to be passed on to the next generation, many of them may not be interested in this. This is a common argument that's given against inheritance tax. Now, it is not difficult to dodge inheritance tax. There are a lot of what we call countries that provide tax havens, that operate as tax havens. Maybe people can shift their wealth there, and this has happened in the case of many corporations, where their patents and other things have been shifted into tax havens, and the countries where these products are created actually don't get any taxes out of them. And the tax also entails some difficult questions about valuations that come into play. So how do you value antiques? How do you value, for instance, even something like stocks, because their prices are continuously changing. Now, The other thing they say is that it could lead to depletion of capital stock over a period of time. And when the inheritance are forced to sell a part of their inheritance to pay for the inheritance tax, that again leads to depletion of diminution of the country's capital over a period of time. And we need capital accumulation to grow as a country. Now, another criticism is that it amounts to double taxation because the person is paying taxes all their life, whether it's a lady, woman and man, and upon their death, they're again taxed. So this, in a way, amounts to double taxation. Now, what are the advantages of inheritance tax? Coming to that, there are philosophical and economic justifications, like I just told you. There is basically inheritance is unearned wealth. You've not done anything to get that money. So taxing that is not a bad thing. So it helps equalize, create a sense of equality in the country over a period of time. And let us say you have even 30% over a period of maybe 3 to 5 generations. People have actually come back to a certain level of equality. Inheritance taxes increase horizontal equality, like I said, over a period of time. Helps vertical equity in taxation and reduces the misallocation of resources. Now, let us not be under the impression that every person who's inheriting wealth somehow is capable of using it properly or would turn out to be a great capitalist or nothing. Not like that. Not every great entrepreneur's child is going to be some extraordinary genius who can do the same thing. Now, inheritance taxes, let us wrap up this idea with a very simple concept. Most of the resistance to this idea comes from ordinary people with what I call the concept of petty inheritances. Everybody is scared about what will happen to their tiny little flat of 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms and things like that, or the small house they own, which they want to desperately pass on to their children. Now, the fact is, like I said, there's going to be a limit to this, and that's going to be excluded from that. Now, the most important thing is, the idea of inheritance taxes is a capitalist idea. This idea came in from within capitalist countries when they saw the extraordinary inequalities that were coming up in their countries. Now, Andrew Carnegie, one of the greatest capitalists of all time, who created a massive empire, he believed that inheritance tax should be 100%. That everybody, when they start their life, they start as equals. Now, a 2% wealth tax and a 3% inheritance tax only on the top 1% of the country would straight away add 10% to India's GDP. So this is a very small figure, 2% wealth tax and 3% income tax for only the top 1%. Everybody else is excluded, and you're straight away adding 10% GDP to the country. Now, we'll stop this idea, this discussion, with a very simple question. How come Karl Marx did not think of inheritance tax? He was an extraordinary thinker, and a lot of ideas have been influenced by him, a lot of people have been influenced by him. I mean, entire countries have been created based on his ideas. How come he never thought of inheritance tax? Inheritance tax clearly is not a part of communism and socialism. The idea is very simple. There's no concept of private property in Marxism or in communism, so there would never be inheritance taxes. Everybody owns everything, and nobody literally owns anything because it's all communally shared. Let us discuss IRDAI prices BIMA VISTAAR at 1500 rupees per policy. The Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, it's an autonomous body, was established in 1999, and it's supposed to manage, it is responsible for managing and regulating the insurance sector in the country. Now, it's a 10-member body with a chairperson and 5 full-time members and 4 part-time members. It's headquartered in Hyderabad, and the goal is to ensure insurance for all by 2047. What is the role of IRDAI? It protects the interests of insurance policyholders and ensures that they are treated in a just manner. Also has to monitor policy issues to ensure that common man's interests are protected. And how are the insurance penetration rates in India? They're very low, as low as 4%, whereas the global average is 6.8%. The lowest penetration is in the general insurance sector, which is 1%, but the industry is eyeing a 50% growth by 2030, and this will reach about 1.5% of the GDP. But when it comes to health insurance, it is much better. It's at 37%, or 514 million people of the 1.4 billion people in the country have medical insurance in 2021. Now, insurance penetration according to countries, these are the figures. Now, India presently has 57 insurance companies. We have 24 life insurers and 33 non-life insurers. Now, who holds the market share in this sector? Life insurance company has 50% of the market share. This is about life insurance. ICICI has about 10%, SBI has 5%, Bajaj has 4%, as you can see. Others have more or less minor shares. Of Reliance has about 5%, Birla has 4%, HDFC has 6%. And there are minor shares from Kotak, Tata, Max, they have like 1%, 2% each. Now, health insurance has a very different set of different distribution when it comes to who actually holds health insurance in India, who's issuing health insurance in India. You can see that New India Insurance has about 18%, Star Health has 16%, Oriental has 16%, National Insurance has 10%, United India has 11%. As you can see, it's distributed a little better. Now, what do we need to ensure that everybody has insurance in the country, or at least a majority of the people have insurance? One is you need awareness. Most people in the country are not aware of what insurance products are available, how they can buy them, and whether they need it or not. So awareness levels about insurance, even among the educated, is fairly low. The other thing is affordability. Now, insurance for a very large number of amount of time, for a very large number of years, has been focused only at the upper middle class, because the idea was that not everybody would be able to afford it, because of which it's not affordable for most people. That is changing now because of a lot of government policies. In fact, the only insurance most people buy would be for the vehicle they possess, because they're legally required to buy it. Now, accessibility, that has been an issue for very long, till recently when we could buy things. Now we are able to buy things online. You can buy policies and other things. Earlier, getting it was quite difficult. And accessibility continues to be a problem where internet penetration is low. Now, the most important thing with this is trust. Many people don't trust that when they actually have to make a claim, that the insurance companies would pay up. Now, this is not always the case. And there is this idea that suppose somebody is insured and they have life insurance and somebody passes away in the family, they are not sure that that money would be released to the beneficiaries. Now, there are also several reasons for this. And there is also another problem that many times companies have been actually accused of taking way too long to settle payments. So because of that, trust is a big factor. So these are the areas where things should change if we want life insurance in the country to increase. Now, this is what the government has been trying to do, and this is considered the UPI movement for insurance. Now, remember, insurance is a very important way of increasing capital in the country. It has been a great source of capital accumulation. So insurance is not only something that takes care of an eventuality, an accident or something that is unforeseen. It is also something that creates capital for the country. Now, BIMA Sugam is an online portal. We have BIMA Vahaks and BIMA VISTAAR. So this is the three ways in which insurance is being now imagined for the future. BIMA Sugam is an online portal where anybody would be able to buy insurance, sell insurance, settle claims, make claims, everything would be done online. So it's going to be an online portal. Now, BIMA VAHAKs is a women-centric insurance distribution channel which would take care of the problem of accessibility. Now, we have seen that women are extraordinary in several areas. Like, for instance, the work done by ASHAs. You take the work done by ASHAs, be it vaccinations, prenatal care, postnatal care, or even the work they did during COVID. It's extraordinary. So, bringing women into this would actually completely transform the sector. Now, BIMA VISTAAR is what we are discussing. Now, how has been a penetration of life insurance across India in the past, say, 21 years? We can see that life and non-life insurance has remained pretty flat. It's not really, it has not really taken off. Whereas you can see that non-life and industry insurance, there was a high, and then they again, they've actually picked up more than other kinds of insurance. Now, what is this new proposal by the IRDAI that we started off with? What is this 1500 rupees in which everybody can get everything? The idea is that it is an ambitious idea. It is a bundled policy which covers life, health, property, and accidents, and it provides benefits for each risk category, ensuring that quick payouts without surveyors. So there won't be surveyors for this. Generally, when you have insurance claims, you have surveyors who come, make a survey, then they send a report, then they do it. So this is not going to be the case for this. Now, the features are the breakup of BIMA VISTAAR. Life cover, there's a premium of 820 rupees. Health cover will be at 500 rupees. Personal accident cover is at 100 rupees. Property cover is at 80 rupees. So the total of 1500 rupees per person. It would cover everything that is necessary, that needs to be insured. Now, the other thing is, if it is taken on a floater basis, it will cost 2420 rupees, and with an additional charge of 900 rupees for the family. So basically, by adding neither 900 rupees, the family would be covered as well. Now, the insurance for life is going to be 2 lakh rupees in case of a personal accident, and the health cover is known as Hospicash, offers a assured sum of 5,000 rupees. It maxes out at 5,000 rupees. It's 500 rupees per day for a period of 10 days. And there need not be any documentation, nothing. And they will be paid the moment they are hospitalized. Now, the property cover, it offers a 50% automatic payout if the damage is 25%. And if the damage is 40%, 100% payout is done. And a maximum of 2 lakhs is given to the beneficiary. Now, we have had a fairly detailed discussion about BIMA Trinity in February. Kindly refer to that if you want to know more about the 3 aspects of this. This was primarily adding to that idea that we have already discussed. Now, like I said, what are the catalysts? What does the industry want from the government? They're saying that they need strong government support, and government is definitely doing that. They are saying recommend amendments to enhance penetration. They want strategic collaborations, and they want product innovation. So these are the areas they are saying through which growth can happen. And the idea is by 2040, everybody will have 47, everybody would have insurance. Now, coming back to what's happened recently, life insurance companies in India have reported a robust growth of 61.23% year on year ending this year. So they have said that there is new business of 20,000 crores, 20,258 crores. Now, this is a very good start to the next year, and they're saying that they could be increasing this even further in the coming year. The overview of the PMAY Urban Scheme. So what is this scheme and how does it work? Let's look at that. Now, by 2050, it's estimated that there will be 900 million people who would have moved to the cities. So they need housing. And one of the flagship programs of the government, of the current union government, is the idea is to have housing for all by 2022. We have not yet achieved this, but this was an ambitious target. And the idea was to have housing for all in both urban and rural areas planned under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana scheme in 2015. So that is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, PMAY. The U refers to the urban part of it. So today we're going to discuss the urban part of it. Now currently, according to the government estimates, there is a shortage of 20 million houses in rural areas and about 3 million houses shortage in the urban areas. And according to a study by Ecrier, urban housing shortage increased by 54% from 2012 to 2018. So that is a massive number. Now, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, what is this? It's a housing for all to be implemented by being implemented by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and it will ensure proper houses for everybody. These are all-weather houses, all-weather Pakka houses for everybody in the urban areas. Now, the nodal agencies, this will be the nodal agencies by the year when the nation completes 75 years, the idea was that everybody would have housing, but we will not yet unfortunately achieve this target. The scheme covers the entire urban areas of the country, all the statutory towns as per the census, including notified towns and planning and developmental areas. So anything that has been notified as an urban area is covered under this scheme. How is the funding pattern for this? It is implemented as a centrally sponsored scheme, and except for the component that is linked to credit-linked subsidy scheme. So it has two components. One part of it is the centrally sponsored part, and another part is the credit-linked part. The Government of India provides financial assistance to the state governments and the union territories, and they further take it forward. Now, what are the initiatives under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana scheme? This is actually a very important idea. There is affordable renting houses complexes being created across the country, which can be used by migrants when they come to the city. So instead of having to live in tin sheds and plastic sheet houses on the streets under, in unbelievably bad conditions, you must have seen people living under bridges on the sides of the streets and all. They would be actually able to rent houses in an affordable way. So this is one part of the scheme. Now there is another part of it called the Global Housing Technology Challenge. Now, as you all know, the idea of sustainable development and the idea of sustainable housing has taken off massively. So the country wants to, or rather under this scheme, the idea is that we innovate and create sustainable houses, and these ideas could then be applied across the world. And sustainable housing is really taken off across the world. And there are several variations of this. There's innovation in terms of material, innovation in terms of design, innovation in terms of how the houses can be structured, and even, practically the whole way a house can be constructed has been completely changed. So this idea links into that. The next part is there is a CLSS Awas portal. The portal facilitates the processing of applicants for the subsidy that is provided to the beneficiaries. And there is the Agnikar there is one part of it called the Agnikar, wherein the idea was social change management initiated by Housing for All mission by 2019. This is also still on. And like I said, the timeline for achieving this idea has been extended. And initially it was thought that by 2022 we would achieve it, but since it has not been done, we have taken a decision to extend it. Now, what are the challenges that Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana in the urban areas is facing? Now, one of the things that we wanted was to have private sector participation, but private sector participation has proved to be double-edged sword, because there is when you have the idea of having to earn profits to just survive, bringing that idea together with a welfare measure of the government creates a certain set of conflicts, and that problem has not been really solved very clearly. The initiative to provide public sector housing in private sector participation in social housing has not really taken off in terms of investments and all, and a lot of issues have cropped up in this. And some of the projects where slums have been handed over to the developers, there have been other issues as well. Like when the houses were built, there is a gap between what the residents wanted and what the builders delivered. Now, the new houses and new complexes that are built all required higher premiums for maintaining them. And in many cases, the beneficiaries found it way too expensive to do that. The maintenance fees were very high, the sewage charges would be high, the water charges would be high. So that has emerged as a problem. Now, there are also problems with land ownership. As you all know, land is a really scarce resource in the country. As a country, we all know that from 300 million people in 1947, we have grown to about 1.42 billion, whereas the size of the country remains the same. So the land that we have is really under stress. And acquiring land in the country is really difficult. Now, there is also a lack of community participation in most of the cases, because of which people are not happy with the projects the way they have been implemented. Now, like I said, there is a mismatch between the preferences of the residents and what would be delivered by the developers, or what has been developed by the developers. And there are also discrepancies in many of the strategies and objectives of the plans. So these are some of the problems. Now, what are the financial dynamics of this program? The center's contribution in this is only 25% of the total layout. The beneficiaries of each household pay 60%, and the state government along with the urban local bodies contributes the rest. So the government is going to dole out about 2.03 lakh crores, and 4.95 lakh crores are going to be paid out of the pockets of the beneficiaries, and the state governments are going to pay out about 1.33 lakh crores. Now, there is a limited role for the government in this, and the architecture as such has failed to adequately address the problem of land resources, and the landless people who actually need houses. We've not been able to actually bridge the gap there. Now, what are the verticals in this? There is affordable housing partnership with the private partners. There's assistance of 1.5 lakhs rupees 1.5 lakhs per house. There is a beneficiary-led individual house construction. The government grants 1.5 lakhs per house. This one, that was per beneficiary per house. Now there is a credit-linked subsidy scheme where there's a subsidy given, and the loan rate is about 3 to 6.5%. Now there is also in situ slum development program. Like I said, slum land has been given to developers, and they were supposed to develop and deliver houses. The government was giving 1 lakh per house in this case. Now, what has been the progress so far? Because the project has been in place for a while. About 118.64 lakh houses have been sanctioned, and 114.17 lakh houses have been grounded. 82.36 lakh houses have been completed. 2 lakh crores of central assistance has been committed, and about 16,392 crores have been, central assistance has been released, and 8.07 lakhs of total investment has been done into this project so far. Now, urban shortage, housing shortage is not even across the country. These are the areas that are actually severely affected by it. Uttar Pradesh has a urban housing shortage of 16.35%. Rajasthan has about 6.12%. So basically, if you see Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, these states together, they account for about 76% of urban houses shortage in the country. So, if we can focus on these states, these 10 states, And if the state governments and the central government work together and the beneficiaries actually come together, we should be able to solve this problem in a much better manner. Ayushman Bharat for all senior citizens. Now, this Ayushman Bharat, as you already know, is part of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. The idea is that this is now going to be extended to all the senior citizens in the country. So let us take a look at this. The Ayushman Bharat scheme, or rather the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, it provides a health coverage of up to 5 lakhs per year for secondary and tertiary care hospitalization to the beneficiaries. So that is what the crux of this program scheme is. Now, how does this work? A patient is hospitalized, and then the beneficiary is identified and registered. There is a request for authorization and approval. Then there is a treatment discharge, and finally the settlements are done. Now, this is basically how it has been done for everybody in this scheme. Now, what has now been suggested is that it should cover all the elderly people in the country. It was launched in 2018, and the scheme covers about 40% of the population, and it is targeted towards the poorest and the most vulnerable people in the country. However, now the idea is that this scheme should cover all the elderly people as well. Now, it was launched as the second component of Ayushman Bharat scheme, and it's basically the idea is to give a health insurance cover of 5 lakhs per year for each family. Earlier the scheme was targeting 10.74 crore poor and deprived people in the country in the rural areas, and it has been broadened to increase the cover to about 65 crore people in the country. And the beneficiaries are identified by the latest socio-economic data that is available in the country. It provides cashless access to health packages which cover surgery, medical care, treatments, cost of medicines, and other things that occur when somebody is hospitalized. Now, what are the achievements of the scheme? There have been these are the number of people who have been covered by it. The authorized hospitals and hospitals have been empaneled. As you can see, there are about 17,000 public sector hospitals that have been empaneled. There are about 12,838 private sector hospitals that have been empaneled. When a hospital is empaneled, what it means is a beneficiary can go there and use that to basically take they can benefit from that. It's not like otherwise they'd have to pay out of their pocket. Like public hospitals are available to everybody, but private hospitals, when they're empaneled, what that actually leads to is that they can people can go in there and use Ayushman Bharat card for actually getting medical treatment free of cost, up to a limit of 5 lakhs. Now, why do we need this program? In a way, or rather, why do we need to change the program to cover all the people all the elderly people in the country? That we need to understand as to what are the motivations of the government in actually extending this program for everybody. As you can see, India is right now reaping the rich dividends of a young population. We have the world's largest young population. But what that effectively means is, in a few decades' time, we'll have a massive old population. So it's time that we put all our resources, all our systems in place to eventually be able to take care of these people. Now, only 8.6% of the population was over the age of 60 years at the time of the last census in 2011. Now, this will increase to 19.5% of the population by 2050, which is to say 1 in every 5 persons will be over the age of 60 by 2050. That is a massive number of people. In terms of absolute numbers, people over the age of 60 will triple from 103 in 2011 to 319 million in 2050. 319 million old people in a country is a very large number of people. and it's important that the country takes care of them and has systems in place to be able to eventually be ready to take care of them. Now, the aging population will obviously mean that there is a greater impact on health. There will be more expenditure on health. We'll need more resources. We'll need more hospitals. So this is why we need to do this. Now, as we just discussed, the health insurance in the country is fairly low. And according to India Aging Report, only just about 20% of the people over the age of 60 had any kind of health cover. Now, those were covered by the state, central and other government schemes. About 97.7% of the elderly are covered. There's not much of a discrepancy in terms of women and men. There's hardly any difference. So gender doesn't seem to be playing very big, much of a role here. Coverage is higher in elderly men, slightly, than in the case of elderly women, but 19.7 to 16.9 is not really such a massive number. But it does have one implication, because generally as people, generally women tend to outlive men and they have longer lifespans. So even though the percentages are not very big, it can have a slightly bigger impact. Now, there are diseases of the old which have been found from where the government has been spending. Now, the elderly are not only affected by communicable diseases, but there are also old age diseases which happen as time goes by. Generally they have heart problems, they have, there is a requirement for surgeries, there's a requirement for general medication, there are also diabetes concern and things like that. Now, what is the financial status of the elderly? When we talk of healthcare, we always have to understand that healthcare is something that can destroy the financial stability or even the financial status of anybody in the world. And this has happened across the world, that falling ill is one way of being completely pauperized, especially in countries that don't have complete healthcare provided by the government. Falling ill is one way through which many people actually lose out their complete wealth. And in India, we have this concept called out-of-pocket expenditure. Many people might have health insurance, but still they may have to pay out of their pockets. Now, what is the financial status of the elderly according to them? So recently in a survey conducted, about 26% of the elderly said their financial condition is good. About 22% said it's average, 20% said it's very poor, 19% said it's very poor, 20% said it's poor, and 13% said it's kind of okay. So basically what we are saying is about 74% of the population, when it comes to the elderly, may not be capable of taking care of their healthcare needs out of their pockets. So that is where having a scheme like Ayushman Bharat for covering all the elderly people in the country is a very good idea. Now, this is what old age dependency ratio, or the number of old people in the country who are dependent on their family, on the children. As you can see, it has gradually increased. It was about 10.9% in 1961. Now it has gone up to 21.5%. In the case of men, 18.8% in the case of women, and overall it's gone up to 18.8%. And in the case of men, it is 21.5%. In the case of women, it's 20.8%, which is to say, 1 in every 5 people who are elderly over the age of 60 are dependent on others. So all the more reason that we have a scheme like Ayushman Bharat. Now, like I said, where is the government actually spending in terms of people falling ill? When the elderly fall ill, what are the major expenditures? It's basically cardiology, general medicine, general surgery, orthopedics, medical and radiation oncology. So basically what this says is, these are all very expensive things. These are all very expensive illnesses, and people definitely need some kind of health cover. So this was about what the Ayushman Bharat scheme is, why we need it, what is the financial status of the elderly, and how this is going to impact people over a period of time. Now, let's discuss sugary processed foods. Over the past few days, or the past week, past couple of weeks, a spotlight has returned to the content of sugar in the foods that we consume, especially in the foods that children consume, because sugar consumption is not a very healthy thing and it can lead to several problems. And as you can see, according to a recent report, Nestle's products for babies in Asia and Africa were found to contain added sugars, which are much more in content, or rather the amount of sugar in Asia and Africa is much higher than what they're selling in Europe and America. Now, Nestle, for instance, controls 20% of the market and has about $70 billion in market share. Government has basically warned against branding of these drinks as healthy, and in case you notice, practically everything is sold as healthy. All your Bonvita, all your malts, all your Horlicks, all these drinks are sold as healthy, and the government has said you cannot use that word easily, you cannot use that word carelessly. It has certain definitions. Now, a drink, let us look at the background of why the government had to issue a warning. Now, a drink like Bonvita has 86.7 grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams, with about 49.8 grams being sugar, which is to say almost half the drink is just plain sugar and nothing else. And so basically what's happening is every 20 grams of a serving has 10 grams of sugar. It's actually not a healthy thing. Sugar is a simple carbohydrate that occurs in foods, like we all know. I mean, fruits have sugar, a lot of even vegetables have sugar, many vegetables have sugar, and it's to be consumed by us, but in a certain limited way. Now, for example, natural sugars like fructose, lactose, and other things, they're there in products like even milk, like curd, what is now called yogurt, actually has sugars, but those are healthy sugars. Free sugar or added sugar is added during the preparation of a product, besides what actually occurs, and that's where the crux of the problem is. Now, when we say what is added, what it has added as sugar, we mean white sugar, brown sugar, and any other sweetener that is there. They're all chemically manufactured, such as high fructose sugar syrup, and all these are unhealthy. Now, the process that is used to make Bonvita involves malting of grains. Now, malting of grains is also a common process in high value drinks like single malts and all, where basically it's a process of a seed is allowed to germinate and then it's roasted. So basically that is the technique they use for making alcoholic drinks. Now, what happens is enzymes turn the starch that is there into sugar. So basically what would have been just a starch is now sugar, and that is not always healthy. Now, this also caramelizes sugars, and this is not healthy. Now, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has said that there is a particular stand they have, or rather there is a clear set of guidelines about what can be called healthy, what can't be healthy. What the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India says is, a product can only claim to be healthy if it has less than 5 grams of sugar for every 100 grams. That is to say, only 5% of a product, if it is sugar, can they say it is healthy. Whereas all these drinks, they have close to 50% and they're claiming to be healthy. So that is where the issue is. Now, the World Health Organization, what they say is, there's a daily limit of 25 grams of sugar per person. That is, we consume this through a variety of means. You may have a glass of milk, you may have a little curd, you may have vegetables, all of them have sugar. All of them together, it cannot exceed 25 grams per day. Now, many houses in India have the habit of adding sugar to a variety of things. Now, added sugar is actually harmful for the body because it leads to weight gain, and it also increases the risk to a variety of diseases like type of diabetes, such as type 2 diabetes. It can increase the risk of a person to be afflicted by this, and it can lead to tooth decay and cavities. It can lead to insulin resistance over a period of time, which again complicates possibility of getting diabetes, and it can also lead to liver overload. Now, sugar is addictive in nature, and it creates nutrient imbalance, and it also is associated with inflammation and also associated with autoimmune disorders. Now, there is another aspect to it which is less known. When people consume sugar, it can also lead to mental problems, and it has been associated with things like depression, anxiety, and other medical health disorders. So what is the way forward? The FSSAI has very clear regulations and allows sugar in cereals for children, but only in a very limited way. And sucrose and fructose can be added, but they cannot exceed the content that has been allowed by the government authorities. Now, there should be a clear regulation about how a product can be classified as healthy, and whether this term healthy can be used just like that. You must also seen things like many companies would say, a particular product is meant for women, a particular drink is meant for women, that it's a healthy drink. But most of the cases, it just has a lot of sugar. So the idea is that going forward, the government should not allow anybody to just use the word healthy on any product, especially for children, especially for infants, because it can lead to a variety of health disorders over a period of time. And there should be clear repercussions when something like this is done. And also corporations and multinationals, they should be more responsible about the use of labeling, like putting things and saying this is healthy. Because children especially are taken in by the advertisements around these products, and they then want to have these products. Let us discuss what is the scope of right to sleep under the Constitution. As we all know, sleep is essential to a human being, and sleep deprivation has been used as a torture method across the world, and there are a variety of views about this, and it's been used as a torture method against a lot of people by even organizations like the CA. There have been repercussions with that. But what happens when we don't sleep? Sleep is essential. It basically allows the body to repair itself, allows the mind to even process memories. What happens when we are deprived of sleep? First, let us see that. The first stage, after 24 hours, what happens when we don't sleep for 24 hours is, it's fairly common to miss 24 hours of sleep, or rather fairly common to go without sleep for a day. It won't cause any major health problems right away, but it's the same as having a blood alcohol concentration as 0.10% in the blood. It's like having a drink. Now, what can it lead to? After 24 hours without sleep, people are drowsy, irritable, they can get angry very quickly. There's an increased risk of stress, there's decreased alertness, there is impaired concentration and brain fatigue, and there are tremors. In just 24 hours, after literally just one day of no sleep, you start having tremors. Tremors is when your hands and body and other parts of the body start shaking. There is reduced coordination within a person. There's increased risk of mistakes or accidents can happen. You start feeling hungry. You have puffy eyes and dark under eye circles. This is just in one day's time, 24 hours of no sleep. What happens after 36 hours? So we are saying a day and 12 hours. What happens then? When you miss 36 hours of sleep, your symptoms become more intense. You'll start experiencing what are called micro sleeps. That is, you'll start going off to sleep for a few seconds without even being aware that you slept off. That is a very serious and dangerous condition. Now, it also has other impacts, like it will start affecting your memory after just 36 hours, no sleep. There's difficulty in learning new information. There are behavioral changes. There's impaired decision making, difficulty in processing social cues, which is to say when you interact with somebody, you'll not be able to understand actually what they're saying or what their body language is or what they intend to say to you. You'll not be able to actually pick up any of that. Your reaction time increases. You take more time to react to very normal things, and there are more errors. And you also start to have physical effects, like you start feeling much more hungry. There are swellings that can happen across the body. Immunity starts to fall down, and there is extreme fatigue. So this is just 36 hours later. What happens after 48 hours? So we are saying 2 days without sleep. What happens? It's known as extreme sleep deprivation, and you are even more likely to have micro sleeps, which is without your knowledge, you start going off to sleep for a period of few seconds, like even maybe 20-30 seconds, and you would not even be aware that you slept. It's basically the mind is shutting down. You might even begin to hallucinate. This is just in 2 days without sleep, you begin to see hallucinations. Now, this occurs when you see, hear, or listen to things that don't exist. That is what is a hallucination. Now, other possible effects, depersonalization, which is to say you don't start seeing other people as people. You have anxiety, increased stress levels, increased irritability, extreme fatigue. So all this is now adding on to the previous conditions that were already there. After 72 hours of no sleep, that is 3 days of no sleep, will significantly impair the way we perceive. Our perception field is very significantly impaired in just 3 days of no sleep. Now, your hallucination might become much more complex. Like after 2 days, we started to say that people are hallucinating. Sorry. After 3 days, the hallucinations will become much more complex and they'll start to feel a lot more real. Now, you can have illusions, you can have delusions, you can have completely disordered thinking and depersonalization. Sorry. After 96 hours of no sleep, which is to say 4 days without sleep, your perception of reality will be severely impacted, which is to say, after 4 days without sleep, your idea of reality starts to break down. It's that sleep is that important to the human beings, to practically all the organisms in the world, but we're discussing about human beings here. Typically, what happens is all the problems that we have discussed with sleep disorder, they typically go away once a person sleeps. Now, according to the Bombay High Court, right to sleep and right to blink are basic rights. They are fundamental rights, and they say that providing it violates a person's human rights. So the Bombay High Court is very clear that these are fundamental rights and you cannot violate them. Now, what are the observations made by the Bombay High Court? Recently, there was a case by a 64-year-old person who was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate. He said that he has been deprived of his sleep. Because of that, the arrest would be illegal. So what the court said that they dismissed the plea, but they said that the right to sleep is a fundamental right. And they said that the right to sleep is granted under Article 21, so it's a fundamental right and he cannot be deprived of that. Now, what it basically says is that nobody can infringe upon the right to sleep of others. However, there are certain limitations to this. This does not mean that people can sleep in public anywhere they want to or anytime they want to, or create a nuisance, or rather sleep without clothes or something like that in public. So those things are not allowed. That is not covered under the right to sleep. So there is a place to sleep and there is a time to sleep, and people have the right to sleep as a fundamental right. So what are there have been a few landmark cases when we talk about the right to sleep. There is Syed Masuk Ali versus the state of Madhya Pradesh that ruled that every citizen is entitled to sleep under Article 21. Now similarly, there is another case, Ramlila Maidan incident versus Home Secretary. This is from 2021. The Supreme Court ruled that the right to sleep is very closely associated with a sound health, and that is an unavoidable right of the Constitution. So all these cases, they basically buttress the idea that Article 21 covers the right to sleep and a person cannot be denied that right. Now, like I said, we started off the discussion with sleep deprivation as a method of torture. Our country clearly says that once it's a fundamental right, you cannot actually torture somebody by depriving them of sleep. So that is a position we have taken as a country. What about the rest of the world? The European Commission says that it is covered under the Convention of Human Rights, and they said that it is a right under human rights. Now, in 2006, the Australian Federal Attorney General Philip Ruddock argued that sleep deprivation does not constitute torture. So this is what Australia said, and Amnesty International said that it is a right, and people have a right to sleep, and any form of sleep deprivation is cruel and inhuman and degrading and is actually a form of torture. Let us discuss women's outlook on women's empowerment. Now, we are going to discuss women empowerment in the context of women empowerment in the context of women participating in the labor force, because there is recently a report. But first, let us see women empowerment, and let us take this idea forward. Now, women empowerment is basically a very large field, and it's a field that is actually taking off, and we need more women empowerment, because right now the position of women in the world and even India is unacceptably bad. However, and in that context, there are 7 principles of women empowerment which are actually quite useful for us in terms of today's discussion. The 7 principles, basically they were created by UN Global Compact and UN Women, and they're used to empower women in the marketplace, workplace and community, because today we are trying to understand women empowerment in the context of employment. This is a good starting point for us. What are the 7 principles of women empowerment? Create high-level corporate leadership for gender equity. Only when there are more women in leadership positions can there be more equality. Treat all people fairly at work. Ensure the health, well-being and safety of all the workers, men and women. Promote education training for women, and implement supply chain marketing practices and enterprise for women. Champion plurality through company initiatives. Measure and report publicly on progress to create gender equality. So these are the 7 principles on the basis of which it's expected that women empowerment will be done, and especially in the context of employment. Now, women economic empowerment is what we are trying to understand. So first is tackling adverse norms and promoting positive role models. There are a lot of hurdles for women. There are a lot of wrong ideas about women, that they are not committed enough, that they lose time due to motherhood. There are a lot of cultural norms that actually prevent women from participating fully in the labor force at all levels, from being workers to CEOs. So that is one problem. Ensuring legal protection and reforming discriminatory laws, that is something that is actually needed. Reorganizing, reducing and redistributing unpaid work and care. Now, many women perform a lot of roles in their life where they're not paid for it. So that has to change. building assets, digital, financial and property for women, strengthening visibility, collective voice and representation, improving public sector practices in employment and procurement, changing business culture and practice. So these are the primary drivers of women's economic empowerment. So if we want to empower women, these are the ideas around which it can be done. Now, International Labour Organization and the Institute of Human Development recently published a report because of which we are discussing this. Now, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, was founded in 1919, right after the First World War. And in 1946, it became a specialized organ of the UN. They're headquartered in Geneva, and there are 187 states that are part of it. Now, recently, like I said, they come out with a report called India Employment Report. Now, we have discussed this report in a previous discussion, where we have tried to see youth employment in the context of this. So, from the same report, today we're trying to understand women empowerment. Now, about India Employment Report, it's a regular report, and this is the latest edition that we are trying to understand. It highlights the trends in the Indian labor market and tries to shows actually what is happening across the country. Now, what are the key highlights of the report? Female labor force participation, what is called you will come across this phrase quite frequently, and you'll generally see it as FP, and generally that's how it is abbreviated. So this is an important idea. This is basically how much percentage of a population is made up of, how much of the population's working category is made up of women and men. The idea is that it should be equal. But as we know, generally men are more a part of the working class than women are, and this is something that holds back women's empowerment. So LFPR was that is the men, they are about 78.5% of the working labor force is made up of men, and the rest is made up of women. So in 2023, the labor force participation rate for women was 37%, whereas around the world it is about 49%. So India has a long way to go. Now, according to the World Bank, India is really quite low. It's at 37%. The world rate is at 47%. Now, the female LFPR was 24.5% in 2019. Before inching up, in 2000, it was a little low, then it has gone up. Now, young women are more likely to indulge in agriculture than young men. Now, tertiary sector, certain activities, there are more women participating. The sectors like trade, hotels, restaurants, public administration, health and education, we have more women participating in those sectors than in other sectors. Even sectors like wellness, sectors like beauty treatments, those are areas where more women are participating. And gender gap is generally in favor of men, which is to say when men and women are doing the same job, men are getting paid more, and this again is a block to female empowerment. Educated female women have higher levels of unemployment than educated men of the same age. Now, around the world, female labor participation rate is very low. It's about 25%. For young people, it is actually low. It increased during the pandemic, and once again it has fallen. Now, this is a concept that keeps coming up over and over. What happens is, in times of distress, more women enter the market, labor force to augment the wage demands of the family, to augment the income of a family. For instance, in the 1980s, when the United States went through massive changes in the manufacturing sector, a lot of industries were shut down. What was noticed was more women entered the working force in order to ensure that their families could sustain themselves. So now what happens in this case is, generally they enter at very low paying jobs. They may be working as waitresses, they may be working as maids, they may be working as laborers or agricultural laborers or things like that. Now, this is something that happens across the world. So that is something we have seen even in the case of India. During COVID years, more women entered the labor force because men were losing their jobs. And women would enter at a lower level. So there would be women who would not otherwise work as maids, would go and work in homes as maids, or maybe they'd go and do some kind of menial labor. So this is something that happens across the world. In times of distress, more women enter the labor force. And same thing happened. And once COVID went away, the labor force participation of women that came down. Now, women employment, education, training amounted to almost 5 times larger than their male counterparts, and accounted for 95% of the total youth population not in employment, which is to say, women who are educated and who are not in training, they're 5 times more unemployed than men of the same age group. A substantial gender gap is available, with men having 2.2 times higher probability of employment than women in 2022. So these are all findings from the report. The gap has widened over a period of time. It used to be 1.2 times in 2005. So in a span of about 17 years, it has widened to 2.2 times. In rural, across sectors, rural youths had 1.1 times higher probability of unemployment than their urban counterparts. So women in rural areas, they're more likely to find employment, but problem there would be, they'll be working in low paying jobs that don't really add to their empowerment, or maybe they're educated up to the class of 10, but they're working as agricultural labor. It doesn't really help them. Sectoral trends suggest that largely women are there in informal, unpaid and low paying work, especially in farming and the construction sectors. Like I said, most of the women are being pushed into jobs, or rather forced to take up jobs which are at the lowest level of the labor. In 2022, proportion of women in self-employment was 6.2%, which was significantly larger than 62%, which is significantly larger than men, which is at 53.1%. Now, the opposite was true in the case of regular employment, with men being 23.6% of men had formal employment, and men had only 16.6%. In casual work, a proportion of men is 23.6% of them are there. Women are 21.4%. These figures are similar. Women in rural areas, about 67.7% of them, were considerably more involved in self-employment than men. In urban areas, there are only 39.3% of women who are involved in self-employed activities. Men in urban areas, 46.2%, engaged more in regular employment than men in rural areas, with only 14.7% involved in regular employment. Now, this is about proportion of workers in subsidiary status by gender. This is like over the age of 15 from 2000 to 2022. As you can see, these are the figures. Now, labor force participation rates by gender and location, that is rural areas and urban areas. When men, women in rural, this is for men, this is for women, rural areas and urban areas. You can see the percentages. Now, what are the reasons for low participation of women in the labor force? There are a few reasons. One is social norms. Many people are against the idea of women going out of their house and working, and where they work, especially in rural areas, they only want them to work in their own agricultural lands, for which they actually are not paid. and women are responsible for cooking, cleaning, and they're expected to take care of that. And the patriarchal mindset stops women from going out and working. And in many cases, safety and security are an issue. So what happens is, if women have to travel and work, then their participation in work comes down, because if the travel arrangements are not safe enough, then the families are very reluctant to allow them to work. So that is another factor. Now, on the labor side, India's growth pattern has not been job intensive. That is, what has happened in India is, the way our markets have grown is, we have found more low paying jobs rather than high paying jobs. So that is again a problem. There are interventions that have to be made in both supply side and demand side. Policies that promote women participation in sectors should be brought out, and there should be investments in safety and transportation and areas like that. Now, what are the 5 things that can be done that are needed to accelerate women's economic empowerment? First is resources. Connecting women to resources so that they can actually participate in the economy and participate in jobs that actually bring them some kind of a dividend, where they actually earn something. That is one thing that needs to be done. Now, we need women in jobs where they're actually paid better, or at least the same as men. In many cases, what happens is, women are actually exploited and they're underpaid. So that needs to change. Time, everybody needs to give time, especially where it comes to gendered roles. We see that most of the cases, when we have women take care of the family, they take care of the children, they take care of the elderly, they take care of the sick. Now, all this takes up time. And in many cases, what happens is, women will have to go fetch water if there is no potable water, there's no drinking water. So all these activities take away a woman's time. And the moment that time is taken out, it is not possible for her to actually get involved in work that will give her some kind of money. And without that, there cannot be empowerment of women. Now, safety and security are a big issue. So we have to actually invest more in those areas to ensure that women can travel to work safely, come back from work safely, and the families would be at ease actually sending them for work. Now, rights is another area where we need to work. Now, around the world, women don't really have equal rights. And in the case of India, it is said, or rather the analysis is that women have 84% equal rights as men. And the idea is that we get to 100%. Now, women empowerment is one of the goals, one of the sustainable development goals that are to be achieved by 2030. So where are we right now? Let us look at how much progress has been. 2030 is not really far off. It's literally just 6 years away. So where are we right now? The world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. That's the first factor. Now, out of 6 total indicators, we are actually not on track to achieve most of them. It's going to take us 300 years from now to end child marriage. It's going to take 286 years to bridge the gap in terms of legal protections. And it's going to take 140 years. All these are at the current rates of social change that's happening. 140 years to ensure that there is equal political participation of women in the legislative fields and in the political field. Nearly half of married women lack decision-making power in the country, in the world, and they don't have rights over their own sexual and reproductive health issues. 1 in 5 young women are likely to be married before their 18th birthday. Now remember, India is one of the few countries that actually has minimum age of marriage at 18. Countries like United States don't really have a minimum age of marriage. If a judge, or in many states a judge or if parents agree, they allow the children to marry. This is the case in a developed country like the United States. So you can imagine how bad it is in the rest of the world. In the case of India, what happens is, in many cases, this 18 years is not enforced, especially in rural areas and all. sometimes they get married before 16, before 18, and doesn't come to the view of the authorities. So that is where we are lacking. We're not lacking in terms of legislative frameworks, we're lacking in terms of implementation. Now, legislative gendered quotas are effective to achieve equality in politics. 30.9 countries are applying these quotas, 21.2% are without quotas. Now, like I said, at the current rate of change, it will take 300 years to stop child marriage, 286 to close the gap in discriminatory laws, 140 years to achieve equality in terms of political participation, and 47 years to ensure there is equal representation in national politics. So this is where it stands right now in terms of women's empowerment. And basically, we are at least 300 years away from achieving women empowerment and women equality. And the idea was that we'd achieve it by 2030. Thank you. I hope this lecture was useful, and best of luck with your preparation.